Welcome to History Before Sleep Stories. Here we travel through the shadows of time, softly, slowly, carefully, so you can fall asleep with a mind full of wonder. Settle in, close your eyes, and let the past begin to unfold. Power, true power, does not announce itself. It does not parade through streets or appear on stages decorated with flags and banners. It does not give speeches to crowds or pose for photographs beside monuments. True power operates in silence, moving through the world like water through soil, invisible but essential, shaping everything it touches without ever being seen. This is the story of power in its purest form, the story of a family whose name became synonymous with wealth beyond measure and influence beyond calculation. A family that understood something fundamental about the nature of money and control, and that used this understanding to position itself at the center of European and eventually global finance for more than 2 centuries. The name is Rothschild, and even today, more than 250 years after the family's rise began, the name carries weight, inspires speculation, generates myths and legends that obscure the historical reality beneath layers of conspiracy and imagination. Before we can understand what the Rothschilds actually were and are, before we can separate fact from fiction and assess their real influence on the development of modern finance and politics, we must acknowledge the myths, for these myths themselves tell us something important about how people relate to wealth and power, about the human need to find simple explanations for complex historical processes, about the way that success, especially financial success, achieved by outsiders to established power structures generates both admiration and suspicion. Some say the Rothschilds control the world's central banks, that they manipulate governments from behind the scenes, that they orchestrate wars and revolutions to serve their financial interests, that they represent a shadowy elite that has ruled humanity for generations, invisible and invulnerable. Some say they are the true power behind thrones and presidencies, that politicians are merely puppets dancing on strings held by bankers whose offices occupy buildings far from the centers of official government. Some say their wealth is so vast it cannot be calculated, that they own significant portions of the world's gold reserves and real estate, that their financial tentacles reach into every major corporation and institution. These claims, dramatic and compelling though they may be, require examination. The Rothschilds were and are bankers, and they achieved extraordinary success in this profession, building a financial empire that spanned Europe and influenced the development of international finance in profound ways. They were connected to governments and aristocracies. They funded wars and industrial development. They accumulated significant wealth and wielded considerable influence. But the reality of their power, while impressive, was more limited and more complicated than the myths suggest, bounded by historical circumstances, challenged by competitors, subject to the same forces of change and decline that affect all human institutions. And the story of the Rothschild family is not the story of invincible financial masters secretly controlling history, but the story of intelligent and ambitious people who recognized opportunities and seized them, who built something remarkable and then struggled to maintain it across generations as the world changed around them. Let us begin at the beginning, in the city of Frankfurt in the 18th century, in a neighborhood called the Judengasse, the Jewish alley, where Jews were required to live, separated from the Christian population, subject to restrictions on their movement and their economic activities, occupying a social position that was precarious and often dangerous. Frankfurt at this time was a free imperial city within the Holy Roman Empire, a center of trade and banking, and while Jews faced discrimination and periodic persecution, they were also allowed to engage in certain professions, particularly money lending and trade, activities that Christians often avoided due to religious prohibitions against usury. In this environment, in the year 1744, a son was born to a family named Bauer, though they would later change their name to Rothschild, taking it from the red shield that hung above their house in the Judengasse. The boy was named Mayer Amschel, and he would become the founder of the banking dynasty, though nothing in his early years suggested such extraordinary success. His father dealt in currency exchange and small-scale lending, maintaining relationships with local merchants and aristocratic households. And young Mayer Amschel learned the business from childhood, developing skills in mathematics and languages, learning to assess the value of coins and bills, understanding the movement of money through the complex networks of European trade and finance. When Mayer Amschel was still young, both his parents died, and he was sent to Fürth to study and train with the Oppenheimer banking family, one of the prominent Jewish banking houses of the time. There, he deepened his knowledge of finance and began to develop the connections that would prove essential to his later success. He returned to Frankfurt in 1764, now 20 years old, and established himself as a dealer in coins and bills, operating from the family house in the Judengasse, handling small transactions, building a reputation for honesty and competence, slowly expanding his business. The key to Mayer Amschel's eventual success lay in his ability to cultivate relationships with powerful patrons. In 1769, he became a court factor to Prince Wilhelm of Hanau, managing some of the prince's financial affairs, and this connection gave him access to higher levels of society and larger financial transactions. Prince Wilhelm, who would later become Wilhelm IX, Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, was one of the wealthiest men in Europe, having inherited a fortune and expanded it through careful management and the profitable business of renting Hessian soldiers to other governments, particularly to Britain, which used German mercenaries extensively in its wars, including the American Revolution. Through his relationship with Wilhelm, Mayer Amschel gained opportunities to handle larger sums of money and to establish connections with other aristocratic houses. He was discreet, efficient, and reliable, qualities that aristocratic clients valued highly in their financial servants, and his business grew steadily through the 1770s and 80s. He married Gutelle Schnapper in 1770, and together they would have 10 children who survived to adulthood, 5 sons and 5 daughters, and it was through these sons that the Rothschild banking empire would be built. The sons were named Amschel, Salomon, Nathan, Kalman, later known as Karl, and Jacob, later known as James. Each would be trained in the family business from childhood, learning not just the technical skills of banking, but the importance of family loyalty, discretion, and coordinated action. Mayer Amschel understood that the family's success would depend on the sons working together, pooling their resources and information, supporting one another's ventures, and maintaining absolute trust among themselves. And he instilled these values through both instruction and example, creating a family culture that would prove remarkably durable across generations. The French Revolution and the wars that followed created both dangers and opportunities for the Rothschilds. When French revolutionary armies swept across Europe in the 1790s, the old order was shattered, governments fell, borders changed, and in this chaos, fortunes could be made by those with the resources and courage to seize opportunities. Wilhelm, Mayer Amschel's patron, was forced to flee Hesse when French forces occupied his territory in 1806, and he entrusted a significant portion of his fortune to Meyer Amschel for safekeeping and management, and this trust would prove to be the foundation of the Rothschild fortune. Managing Wilhelm's money during the Napoleonic Wars gave Meyer Amschel access to capital on a scale he had never handled before, and he used it brilliantly, investing in various ventures, facilitating payments for British subsidies to Continental allies, dealing in bills of exchange across borders that were constantly shifting due to military campaigns. The risks were enormous, the potential for loss catastrophic. But Meyer Amschel understood that in times of chaos, those who could provide financial services that governments desperately needed could demand high fees and establish lasting relationships, and this is exactly what he did. By this time, his sons were old enough to participate actively in the business, and Meyer Amschel implemented the strategy that would distinguish the Rothschild family from other banking houses. He sent his sons to different cities to establish branches of the family business, creating a network that could operate across national boundaries, sharing information rapidly through coded messages, coordinating financial operations, taking advantage of price differences in different markets, and providing services that required presence in multiple locations simultaneously. Nathan, the third son, was sent to Manchester, England in 1798, initially to purchase textiles for resale on the continent. But he quickly recognized that greater opportunities lay in finance, and by 1805 he had moved to London and established himself as a merchant banker. Salomon would later be sent to Vienna, Karl to Naples, and James to Paris, while Amschel, the eldest, remained in Frankfurt to manage the original banking house after their father's death in 1812. This geographic dispersal was the key to the family's success, for it allowed them to operate as a truly international banking network at a time when most banks were confined to single cities or countries, and it gave them access to information faster than their competitors, information about political events, military developments, market conditions, which they could use to make profitable financial decisions. The most famous story about the Rothschilds concerns the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, where British and Prussian forces under Wellington and Blücher defeated Napoleon, effectively ending his attempt to regain power after his escape from Elba. According to legend, Nathan Rothschild in London received news of Napoleon's defeat through his private courier network before the British government learned of it, and he used this information to make enormous profits on the London Stock Exchange, either by buying government bonds that would rise when news of victory arrived, or in some versions by first selling bonds to drive prices down, and then buying them back cheaply before the news became public. And this single coup supposedly established the family's vast fortune. The reality, as historical research has established, is more complicated and less dramatic. Nathan Rothschild did have an excellent information network, and he probably did learn of Waterloo's outcome earlier than most. But the evidence suggests his trading around this event was more modest than legend claims, and while he certainly profited from dealing in government securities during this period, the family's wealth was built over years through many transactions, not through a single spectacular speculation. The legend persists because it captures something people want to believe about the Rothschilds, that their success came from secret information and market manipulation, that they represent a kind of financial aristocracy that operates by different rules than ordinary people. And while there is some truth to the idea that information was central to their business model, the legend exaggerates their prescience and their profits. What is certainly true is that by the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, the Rothschild family had established itself as one of the premier banking houses in Europe. They had provided crucial financial services to the British government during the war, handling the complex business of transferring funds to Britain's allies on the continent, and they had done so efficiently and discreetly, earning the trust of government officials who would continue to use their services in peacetime. They had also established themselves in multiple European capitals, creating the network that would be their primary advantage over competitors for the next several decades. The post-Napoleonic period saw enormous demand for government loans as nations struggled to manage war debts and fund reconstruction. And the Rothschilds positioned themselves to provide these loans, often in cooperation with other banking houses, sometimes in competition, building relationships with finance ministries, and taking on increasingly large and complex financial operations. In 1818, they arranged a loan to the Prussian government. In 1821, they provided loans to Naples and to Prussia again. In 1822, they participated in loans to Austria, Russia, and Prussia, becoming the primary bankers to the Austrian Empire under Prince Metternich, who valued their international connections and their ability to raise large sums quickly. These government loans were profitable, but also risky. They required the Rothschilds to advance large amounts of capital, sometimes their own funds, but often money they had borrowed from other investors, and they had to market government bonds to the public, taking on the risk that prices might fall before all the bonds could be sold. They charged fees for these services, and when successful, the profits could be substantial, but failures could also be costly, and the Rothschilds suffered losses on some loans when Government S defaulted or when market conditions turned unfavorable. Overall, however, they managed these risks effectively, building a reputation for financial soundness that attracted investors and government clients alike. The family's success brought social advancement, though this came more slowly than financial success and varied by country. In Austria, Salomon Rothschild received a title of nobility in 1816, becoming a baron, and other members of the family would receive similar honors in various countries, though they remained Jewish and faced socials barriers that Christian banking families did not encounter. In England, Nathan Rothschild and his descendants would gradually be accepted into elite society, though full integration took generations and required conversion to Christianity by some family members. In France, James de Rothschild became a major figure in Parisian society and business, building a palace and collecting art, marrying his niece to keep wealth within the family, a practice that the Rothschilds followed frequently and that helped maintain family cohesion, but also led to genetic problems in later generations. By the 1830s and 40s, the Rothschild network was at its peak of influence. The 5 banking houses in Frankfurt, Vienna, Naples, Paris, and London operated in coordination, sharing information through regular correspondence, supporting one another's operations, pooling resources for large projects, and maintaining the family tradition of absolute discretion about their affairs, revealing as little as possible about their finances and strategies, which fed speculations and suspicion, but also protected them from competitors and from governments that might seek to exploit knowledge of their vulnerabilities. They financed major infrastructure projects, particularly railways, recognizing that the development of rail networks would transform European economies and that early investors in successful railways could earn substantial returns. In France, James de Rothschild became the primary financier of railway construction, building the Chemin de Fer du Nord and other lines. In Austria, Salomon invested in the Kaiser Ferdinand Nordbahn, the first steam railway in the Austrian Empire. These investments required enormous capital and carried significant risks, but they also gave the Rothschilds influence over industrial development and access to information about economic trends, and they generally proved profitable. The revolutions of 1848, which swept across Europe and threatened established governments in France, Austria, and numerous German states, posed serious challenges to the Rothschilds. As financiers closely associated with conservative governments and aristocratic elites, they were natural targets for revolutionary sentiment, and they faced threats to their properties and their persons, particularly in Paris and Vienna, where revolutionary crowds associated them with the old order that was being challenged. James de Rothschild in Paris had to flee the city temporarily, and the Paris house suffered temporary difficulties, but the family weathered the crisis, and when conservative forces regained control and the revolutions were suppressed, the Rothschilds resumed their role as primary bankers to European governments. Through the middle decades of the 19th century, the Rothschilds continued to dominate international finance, though they faced increasing competition from other banking houses, particularly from newer institutions in America, where investment banking was developing rapidly to fund industrial expansion. The Rothschilds were slower to recognize opportunities in the United States, focusing primarily on Europe, and this would prove to be a strategic error that limited their influence in the 20th century, as American financial power grew relative to European power. They continued to fund government loans, arrange bond issues, finance trade, and invest in industrial enterprises, accumulating wealth that made them, by most accounts, the richest family in the world through much of the 19th century. Though precise figures are impossible to determine because they never published accounts and guarded their financial information carefully. Estimates of their wealth varied wildly, with some contemporary observers claiming they controlled half the world's wealth, which was certainly exaggerated, but even conservative estimates place them among the very wealthiest individuals and institutions of their time. The family began to acquire estates and build mansions, establishing themselves in the countryside as well as in major cities, creating a lifestyle that combined Jewish tradition with European aristocratic culture, maintaining kosher households but also collecting art and fine wines, supporting Jewish charities but also participating in Christian society, a complex cultural position that reflected their unique status as Jewish financiers who had achieved wealth and influence in societies that were officially Christian and often anti-Semitic. In England, the Rothschilds became particularly prominent in society and politics. Lionel de Rothschild, Nathan's son, was elected to Parliament in 1847, but could not take his seat because he refused to take the Christian oath required of members of Parliament. And this led to a long political struggle that eventually resulted in Jews being allowed to sit in Parliament after swearing on the Hebrew Bible. And Lionel finally took his seat in 1858, the first Jewish member of Parliament, a significant moment in the gradual emancipation of British Jews. His son, Nathan Mayer Rothschild, later became the first Jewish peer in Britain, elevated to the House of Lords as Baron Rothschild in 1885, marking the family's full acceptance into the highest levels of British society, though anti-Semitism never entirely disappeared and would resurface virulently in the 20th century under different political circumstances. The Rothschilds also became involved in supporting Jewish causes and Zionist aspirations, though family members had varying views on these matters. Edmund James de Rothschild of the Paris branch became a major supporter of Jewish settlement in Palestine in the late 19th century, funding agricultural colonies and infrastructure, helping to lay groundwork for what would eventually become the State of Israel, though the family's involvement with Zionism was complicated, and not all family members supported the movement, some preferring assimilation into European society rather than the establishment of a separate Jewish state. By the late 19th century, the coordinated family network was beginning to weaken. The generation of Mayer Amschel's sons had maintained close cooperation, but their children and grandchildren were less tightly connected, more integrated into the societies of their respective countries, sometimes competing rather than cooperating. And the Naples house closed in 1861 when the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies was absorbed into unified Italy, and the Frankfurt house would close in 1901 when the male line there died out, reducing the 5-branch network to 3 houses in London, Paris, and Vienna, which continued to operate but with less perfect coordination than their founders had maintained. The 20th century brought catastrophic changes that dramatically affected the Rothschild family. The First World War divided the family, with English Rothschilds supporting Britain and France, while Austrian Rothschilds had complex relationships with the Central Powers. And though family members maintained personal relationships across the war, the business network was severely disrupted, and the financial devastation of the war and its aftermath, the collapse of empires, the hyperinflation in Germany and Austria, the political upheavals and revolutions, all of this created an environment in which the Rothschilds' traditional business model of government lending became less profitable and more risky. The Vienna house, once one of the most powerful branches, suffered particularly severely. Austria-Hungary's defeat in the war and the breakup of the empire destroyed the political and economic system within which the Rothschilds had operated, and the rise of fascism and anti-Semitism in the 1920s and 30s created threats to Jewish families regardless of their wealth. And when Nazi Germany annexed Austria in 1938, the Vienna Rothschilds lost everything, their properties confiscated, their bank taken over, and Nathaniel de Rothschild was arrested and held for ransom, only released after the family transferred significant assets to the Nazi regime, and he fled to the United States. And the Vienna branch of the family essentially ceased to exist as a major financial institution. In France, the Rothschilds faced similar threats when Germany occupied France in 1940, and the Paris banking house was confiscated and its assets looted, and family members fled to Britain or the United States or Switzerland, losing much of their property though retaining some wealth that had been moved abroad or hidden. And after the war, they would work to rebuild their position in France, though it would never again reach the dominance they had enjoyed in the 19th century. The English Rothschilds, protected by Britain's island geography and eventual victory in the war, fared better, maintaining their banking operations and their social position, though they too faced changes in the post-war world as Britain's relative. Economic decline and the rise of American financial power shifted the center of global finance from London to New York, and the Rothschilds, having failed to establish a major presence in the United States, found themselves less central to international finance than they had been. In the post-war period, the Rothschild banks adapted to new circumstances, focusing on mergers and acquisitions advisory, private banking for wealthy clients, asset management, and other specialized financial services, rather than the large-scale government lending that had been their bread and butter in the 19th century. They remained significant players in European finance, particularly in London and Paris. But they no longer dominated international finance the way they once had, facing competition from large American investment banks and from new European financial institutions. The family also diversified into other investments, acquiring stakes in mining companies, particularly in South Africa, where they had interests in diamond and gold mining, investing in real estate, building wine and agricultural businesses, collecting art and establishing foundations, maintaining significant wealth across multiple family branches, but operating more as wealthy individuals and separate business entities rather than as a coordinated financial empire. Today, in the 21st century, Rothschild businesses continue to operate primarily under the name Rothschild & Co., providing mergers and acquisitions advice, wealth management, and other financial services, employing thousands of people, maintaining offices in major cities around the world, but operating as professional firms managed by career bankers rather than as family businesses controlled exclusively by family members, though family members remain involved and some hold leadership positions. The family remains wealthy, certainly, with various members appearing occasionally on lists of billionaires, though their wealth is now dispersed among many descendants rather than concentrated in a few hands, and they are no longer the wealthiest family in the world, if they ever truly held that distinction, surpassed by newer fortunes built in technology and industry, and by sovereign wealth funds controlled by nations rather than families. Yet the name Rothschild continues to carry weight, continues to appear in conspiracy theories and popular culture as shorthand for financial power and hidden influence, continues to generate speculation far beyond what the current reality of the family's businesses and wealth would justify, and this persistence of the Rothschild myth, long after the family's actual dominance of international finance has ended, tells us something important about how people think about money and power, about the human need to personalize complex economic systems, to find individuals or families to blame or credit for historical developments that actually resulted from countless factors and actors, to imagine that somewhere there are puppet masters pulling strings rather than accepting the chaotic and decentralized reality of how the world actually works. The question remains, why do the Rothschilds specifically generate such persistent mythology? Part of the answer certainly lies in anti-Semitism, the long history of associating Jews with money and banking, and of blaming Jews for economic problems and social changes, and conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds often contain explicitly or implicitly anti-Semitic elements, portraying them as examples of supposed Jewish control of finance and politics. And these theories have been used to justify persecution and violence against Jews generally, not just against the Rothschild family specifically. But the persistence of Rothschild mythology also reflects genuine historical reality, for the family did achieve remarkable success and did wield significant influence during the 19th century, and their preference for secrecy and discretion, while understandable given their vulnerable position as Jews in often hostile societies, fed speculation about what they were hiding, and their actual wealth and influence, considerable though not unlimited, was exaggerated in popular imagination until they became symbolic of financial power generally, rather than representatives of one particular banking family among many. To understand the reality of Rothschild power and influence, we must examine specific operations and transactions, the actual mechanisms by which the family wielded influence, not through secret conspiracies or puppet master control, but through the provision of essential financial services at crucial historical moments, and through the accumulation of relationships and information that allowed them to operate more effectively than competitors. Consider the Suez Canal transaction of 1875, one of the most celebrated Rothschild deals, and one that demonstrates both the extent and the limits of their power. The Suez Canal, connecting the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and thus providing a shortcut for ships traveling between Europe and Asia, had been completed in 1869 under French leadership, with the Egyptian government holding a significant share of the canal company. By 1875, Egypt was in financial difficulties. Its ruler, the Khedive Ismail, desperate for cash to service debts and maintain his government, and he decided to sell Egypt's shares in the Canal Company. The British government, recognizing the strategic importance of the canal for maintaining communications with India and the rest of the British Empire, wanted to purchase these shares, but Parliament was not in session, and there was no way to quickly authorize the necessary funds through normal governmental channels. Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, who had close relationships with the Rothschild family, turned to Lionel de Rothschild and asked if the bank could provide a loan to the government of £4 million, an enormous sum, to be repaid when Parliament reconvened and could authorize the expenditure. Lionel de Rothschild agreed, and according to legend, when asked what security the government could provide for such a large loan on short notice, he simply said the British government's word was sufficient security, and the money was provided within hours, allowing Britain to purchase the Egyptian shares before other buyers could organize the necessary funds. The transaction gave Britain effective control of the canal and was celebrated as a diplomatic and strategic triumph, and the Rothschilds earned both their loan fees and considerable gratitude from the British government. This story illustrates several important points about Rothschild power. First, they had access to large amounts of capital and could deploy it quickly, giving them influence in situations where time was crucial. Second, they had relationships with government leaders that allowed them to be approached for such transactions and trusted to handle them discreetly. Third, they operated as bankers providing financial services, not as puppet masters. Controlling governments, the decision to purchase the canal shares was made by the British government for its own strategic reasons. The Rothschilds simply provided the means to execute that decision quickly. Fourth, they were compensated for their services through fees and interest, earning profit in the conventional way that banks earn profit, not through some mysterious mechanism of hidden control. Similar patterns appear in other major Rothschild operations. When European governments needed to borrow money to fund wars or infrastructure projects, the Rothschilds would arrange loans, sometimes advancing their own capital, but more often organizing syndicates of investors and marketing bonds to the public, earning fees for these services and taking on risks that other financial institutions were unwilling or unable to bear. When businesses needed capital for expansion, the Rothschilds would provide it or arrange for it to be provided, again earning fees and sometimes taking equity stakes that could prove profitable if the businesses succeeded. The family's railway investments are particularly instructive. Beginning in the 1830s and continuing through the 19th century, the Rothschilds financed railway construction across Europe, recognizing that railways would transform economies and that early investors in successful lines could earn substantial returns. James de Rothschild in Paris became the dominant figure in French railway finance, building the Chemin de Fer du Nord, the Northern Railway, which connected Paris to the English Channel and became one of France's most profitable lines. In Austria, Salomon von Rothschild invested heavily in railway construction, building the Kaiser Ferdinand Nordbahn and other lines that opened up the Austrian Empire to industrial development. These railway investments required enormous capital, involved complex negotiations with governments for rights of way and regulatory approvals, faced technical challenges in construction through difficult terrain, and carried significant risks that lines might not attract enough traffic to be profitable, but they also gave the Rothschilds influence over industrial development, access to information about economic trends and trade patterns, and eventually substantial profits when successful. Lines paid dividends and their shares appreciated in value. The Rothschilds were not the only investors in European railways. They faced competition from other banking houses and from governments that sometimes built railways directly. But they were among the largest and most sophisticated railway investors, and this gave them economic power and political influence in multiple countries. Mining investments followed similar patterns. The Rothschilds acquired stakes in mining companies in various countries, most notably in Spain, where they took control of the Rio Tinto copper mines in 1873, when the Spanish government, desperate for revenue, sold the mines cheaply, and the Rothschilds invested in modernizing the mining operations and expanding production, and Rio Tinto became one of the world's major mining companies, and the Rothschilds' stake in it remained valuable for generations. They invested in diamond and gold mining in South Africa, becoming major shareholders in De Beers and other companies that would dominate the South African mining industry. They invested in oil production in Russia in the late 19th century, competing with the Rockefellers and other oil magnates for control of this emerging industry. These mining investments gave the Rothschilds interests in natural resources that were essential for industrial development, and this translated into both economic returns and political influence for governments and businesses that needed access to copper or diamonds or oil had to negotiate with the companies that controlled these resources, and the Rothschilds, as major shareholders and financiers, had a voice in these negotiations. But again, this was not secret control. It was conventional business influence of the sort that any major investor would possess, exercised through boards of directors and shareholder meetings and business relationships, visible to anyone who studied the public records of these companies. The question of how wealthy the Rothschilds actually became is difficult to answer with precision, because they never published accounts of their total wealth and actively concealed information about their finances from outsiders and often from tax authorities. Contemporary estimates varied wildly, with some claiming the family controlled half or more of the world's wealth, which was certainly absurd, while others offered more modest figures that were probably closer to reality, though still based on guesswork rather than solid evidence. What we can say with confidence is that by the mid-19th century, the Rothschild family was among the very wealthiest in Europe and possibly in the world, with the combined fortunes of the five brothers and their descendants likely exceeding those of any other private family and rivaling or exceeding the treasuries of many governments. The capital of the five banking houses in the 1820s was estimated at over 100 million francs, an enormous sum for that time, and this capital grew through the following decades as successful investments and loan operations accumulated profits, and while the family also spent lavishly on real estate and art and charitable causes, the core banking businesses remained highly profitable through most of the 19th century. The family's spending on art deserves particular mention, for the Rothschilds became among the greatest art collectors of the 19th century, acquiring old master paintings and decorative arts, and creating collections that would eventually form important parts of museum holdings in multiple countries. The palaces they built, particularly in France and England and Austria, were showcases for these collections, and they opened them occasionally to scholars and eventually to the public. And this cultural patronage, combined with their charitable giving to Jewish and general causes, created a public image that was more complex than simple capitalist accumulation, though it also sparked resentment from those who saw such displays of wealth as offensive or who believed the money would be better spent on social reforms. The family's social position evolved differently in different countries. In England, the Rothschilds gradually achieved full integration into elite society, with family members marrying into the aristocracy, receiving titles, entering Parliament, and eventually the House of Lords, collecting art and horses, participating in the social rituals of the British upper class, though they generally maintained their Jewish identity and continued to support Jewish causes and institutions. The family's Waddesdon Manor and other estates became centers of social and political gatherings, where politicians and aristocrats and intellectuals would meet. And these gatherings gave the Rothschilds social influence that complemented their financial power. In France, social integration was more complicated, as French society was more divided by the revolutionary legacy and by class conflicts that made aristocratic pretensions problematic. But the French Rothschilds nevertheless built magnificent hotels, particuliers in Paris and chateaux in the countryside, and they too collected art and entertained lavishly, though they faced more explicit anti-Semitism than their English cousins, and were always somewhat outsiders to French elite society despite their wealth. James de Rothschild's palace on the Rue Lafitte became famous for its art collection and for the social events held there, and his son Alphonse continued this tradition. But the family always faced suspicion and hostility from certain quarters of French society. In Austria, the Rothschilds received noble titles and were accepted into the Habsburg court to some degree, providing financial services to the empire and investing in Austrian industrial development. But they too faced anti-Semitism and social barriers, and their position became increasingly precarious as nationalist and anti-Semitic movements grew in strength in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, leading eventually to catastrophe when the Nazis annexed Austria. The family maintained extensive charitable activities throughout their history, particularly supporting Jewish communities and causes, but also contributing to general charitable institutions. They funded synagogues and Jewish schools, supported Jewish immigrants and refugees, contributed to hospitals and universities, and engaged in the philanthropy that was expected of wealthy families in the 19th century, and this giving, while sincere, also served to improve their public image and create goodwill that could be valuable in business and political contexts. The coordination among the 5 branches of the family, so crucial to their early success, began to break down in the late 19th century as the generations multiplied and family members became more integrated into their respective national societies and less connected to cousins in other countries. The practice of cousins marrying cousins, intended to keep wealth within the family and maintain unity, created genetic problems, with higher rates of genetic disorders in later generations. And while it did help preserve wealth concentration, it also limited the family's ability to expand its social networks through marriage alliances with other powerful families. The closure of the Naples branch in 1861, when Karl's son Adolf died without heirs, and the Italian unification process made Naples a less important financial center, reduced the network from 5 branches to 4. The closure of the Frankfurt branch in 1901, when the mail line there ended, further reduced the network to 3 branches in London, Paris, and Vienna. And while these 3 continued to cooperate to some degree, they operated increasingly as separate businesses with their own strategies and priorities, rather than as a coordinated empire. The First World War was a turning point for the Rothschild family, as it was for European civilization generally. The war divided the family along national lines, with English and French Rothschilds supporting the Allied cause, while Austrian Rothschilds faced complex loyalties as their adopted country fought against Britain and France. The personal relationships among family members survived the war. They continued to correspond and to express concern for one another's welfare. But the business network was severely disrupted, and the financial devastation of the war and its aftermath created an environment very different from the relatively stable 19th century in which the family had flourished. The war destroyed the old financial order based on the gold standard and on government bonds as safe investments, as governments printed money to finance war spending and inflated away their debts, and bondholders who had expected steady returns found their investments worth far less than they had anticipated, and this damaged the Rothschilds' traditional business model, which had relied heavily on government lending. The collapse of empires, particularly Austria-Hungary, destroyed the political systems within which the Rothschilds had operated, and the rise of new ideologies, particularly communism and fascism, both explicitly hostile to international finance and often explicitly anti-Semitic, created threats that the family had never faced before. The Russian Revolution of 1917 and the Bolshevik victory in the subsequent Civil War resulted in the expropriation of Rothschild properties and investments in Russia, particularly oil facilities in Baku, that the family had invested in heavily. And while these losses were significant, they were less catastrophic than they might have been because the family had diversified investments across many countries and industries and could absorb losses in one area through gains in others. The hyperinflation in Germany and Austria in the early 1920s destroyed savings and disrupted financial markets, and while the Rothschilds were sophisticated enough to protect much of their wealth through investments in real assets and foreign currencies, the economic chaos weakened the position of their Austrian branch and eliminated many of their traditional clients who were ruined by the inflation. The rise of fascism in Italy in the 1920s created problems for Jewish families regardless of wealth, and while the Italian Rothschilds had already largely withdrawn from business after the closure of the Naples branch, the fascist regime's adoption of anti-Semitic policies in the 1930s demonstrated that wealth and social position could not fully protect Jewish families from political persecution. The Great Depression of the 1930s further damaged the Rothschild position, as economic collapse reduced demand for financial services, as defaults on bonds and loans resulted in losses, as the value of investments fell, and as political instability created an environment where international banking became more difficult and risky. The family weathered the Depression better than many, their diversified investments and conservative financial management protecting them from total ruin. But the Depression accelerated the shift of financial power from London and Paris to New York, where American banks and investment firms were emerging as the new dominant players in global finance. And the Rothschilds' failure to establish a major presence in the United States left them increasingly peripheral to the new financial order that, was developing. The rise of Nazi Germany represented an existential threat to the Rothschild family, as to all European Jews. The Nazis' explicitly anti-Semitic ideology identified Jews as enemies of the German people and targeted them for persecution and eventually genocide. And wealthy Jews were particular targets because the Nazis sought to expropriate their property to fund the regime, and because propaganda that blamed Jews for economic problems often focused on wealthy Jewish financiers as symbols of supposed Jewish power. The Rothschilds, as the most famous Jewish banking family, were obvious targets for Nazi propaganda and eventually for Nazi expropriation. When Germany annexed Austria in March 1938, the Vienna Rothschilds faced immediate danger. Louis Nathaniel von Rothschild, who headed the Austrian branch of the family, was arrested by the Gestapo and held for more than a year while the Nazis negotiated terms for his release, demanding that the family surrender its Austrian properties and investments, including the Creditanstalt Bank and extensive industrial holdings, essentially confiscating the entire Austrian Rothschild fortune as ransom for one man's life and freedom. Louis was finally released in May 1939 after these terms were met, and he fled to the United States, and the Austrian branch of the family effectively ceased to exist, its wealth stolen, its position destroyed. In France, the Rothschilds faced similar threats when Germany occupied the country in June 1940. The Paris banking house was seized by the Nazi authorities and its assets looted. The family's art collections, among the finest in France, were systematically plundered, with many works shipped to Germany for Hitler's planned museum in Linz or taken. For the private collections of Nazi leaders, and family members fled to unoccupied southern France, or to Britain, or to the United States, or to Switzerland, abandoning properties and investments they could not protect, losing much, though retaining some wealth that had been moved abroad or hidden before the occupation. The destruction of the Austrian and French Rothschild operations during World War II represented the greatest catastrophe in the family's history, comparable to losses suffered by millions of other European Jews, though on a vastly larger financial scale. The family survived, members escaped with their lives, unlike millions who perished in the Holocaust, and some wealth remained. But the coordinated European banking network that had been the foundation of Rothschild power was broken, and when the war ended in 1945, the family faced the challenge of rebuilding in a world that had changed fundamentally and in which their traditional business model no longer worked as it once had. The English Rothschilds emerged from the war in the best position, having been protected by Britain's successful defense against invasion and having maintained banking operations in London throughout the conflict, though they too had suffered losses through disrupted business and through the deaths of family members who served in the military. In the post-war period, they continued to operate N.M. Rothschild and Sons as a merchant bank, adapting to the new regulatory environment and the changed financial markets, focusing on advisory services and specialized financial products, rather than the large-scale government lending that had characterized their 19th century operations. The French Rothschilds returned to Paris after liberation and began the long process of recovering what they could of their confiscated properties and rebuilding their banking operations. Some art was recovered, some properties were restored to family ownership, but much was lost permanently, and the reconstruction took years and was never complete. The Paris banking house reopened and resumed operations, but in a much more modest form than before the war, competing with large French banks and facing a political environment that was sometimes hostile to private banking and to wealth. Concentration. The post-war decades saw the Rothschild banks adapt to new conditions, developing expertise in mergers and acquisitions advisory, helping companies buy and sell other companies or divisions, providing advice on corporate finance and strategy, managing wealth for private clients, investing in hedge funds and private equity, all the various services that modern investment banks provide, but operating on a smaller scale than the giant American investment banks that came to dominate global finance in the late 20th century. The family businesses also diversified beyond banking into investments in various industries, acquiring or building stakes in mining companies, wine estates, real estate developments, agricultural operations, and numerous other ventures, managing wealth across multiple asset classes and geographies, operating more as a wealthy family with diverse investments than as a banking empire controlling governments and markets. Some family members remained active in banking, running the Rothschild financial services firms, while others pursued different careers or managed family investments, and the unity of earlier generations when the five brothers coordinated every major decision gave way to a more dispersed structure where different family branches operated largely independently. In 1981, the French socialist government under President François Mitterrand nationalized major French banks, including the Rothschild Bank in Paris, and the family lost control of the institution that had been central to their operations in France for more than 150 years. They were compensated for the nationalization, but at values they considered inadequate, and the Paris branch of the family banking business effectively ended, though family members continued to be wealthy and to manage private investments. In 1987, David de Rothschild founded a new bank, Rothschild and C.A. Bank, which acquired the business of the nationalized bank when it was partially reprivatized, and this new institution continued the family's banking tradition in France, but on a smaller scale and in a more competitive environment than had existed in earlier periods. In 2003, the London and Paris branches of the family decided to merge their banking operations, creating Rothschild & Co., a unified European investment bank rather than separate national operations. And this merger, while sensible from a business perspective, also represented an acknowledgement that the family no longer had the resources or market position to maintain multiple independent banking houses operating in different countries. That survival in modern financial markets required consolidation and scale, and that the era of the dispersed but coordinated family network had definitively ended. Today, Rothschild & Co. operates as a professional financial services firm, providing mergers and acquisitions advisory, wealth management, asset management, and other services to corporate and private clients, employing thousands of people, most of whom have no family connection, competing with much larger banks and financial institutions for business, profitable but no longer dominant in any major area of finance, a significant player in the European market, but not a giant on the global stage. The family retains ownership stakes and family members serve in leadership positions, but the firm operates according to modern corporate governance principles and professional management practices, rather than as a family business controlled exclusively by family members. The current wealth of the Rothschild family is substantial but difficult to estimate, precisely because it is dispersed among many descendants and held in various forms, including stakes in Rothschild & Co. and other businesses, real estate, art, collections, and financial investments. Various estimates have placed individual family members' wealth in the hundreds of millions or low billions of dollars, making them wealthy, certainly, but not among the very richest people in the world, surpassed by technology entrepreneurs and by those who built fortunes in other industries in recent decades, and far from the mythical trillion-dollar fortunes sometimes attributed to the family in conspiracy theories. The persistence of conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds, theories that attribute to them control over central banks and governments and that see their hand behind major political events, these theories continue despite the declining reality of Rothschild power and despite lack of evidence to support dramatic claims, and this persistence tells us something important about how conspiracy theories function and why they appeal to certain audiences, and how anti-Semitism continues to manifest in modern form. Conspiracy theories serve psychological needs. They provide simple explanations for complex events. They identify villains who can be blamed for problems. They give believers a sense of secret knowledge that ordinary people lack. They create narratives that make sense of a confusing world. And the Rothschild conspiracy theories serve all these functions, attributing wars and economic crises and political developments to the machinations of a secret elite, rather than to the complex interplay of many factors and actors that actually drives historical change. These theories are also vehicles for anti-Semitism, allowing hatred of Jews to be expressed in the supposedly respectable form of criticism of international finance or globalism or elites, using the Rothschilds as stand-ins for Jews generally, recycling old anti-Semitic tropes about Jewish control of money and manipulation of Christians, updating medieval blood libels and conspiracy theories for modern audiences, while maintaining the core message that Jews are dangerous aliens who cannot be trusted, and the Rothschild conspiracy theories have been used to justify persecution and violence against Jews, from Nazi propaganda to contemporary extremist movements, and this makes them not merely false, but actively harmful. Responsible historians and journalists who examine the evidence find that while the Rothschild family achieved remarkable financial success in the 19th century and wielded significant influence, their power was always limited by competition from other banks, by government regulations and policies they could not control, by market forces and historical events that affected them as they affected everyone else, and that in the 20th century, their influence declined dramatically as new financial institutions rose to prominence and as the geographic center of finance shifted from Europe to America, and as the family's own unity and resources diminished across generations. The family today continues to be involved in finance and business. Family members remain wealthy and socially prominent in certain circles. They maintain the family tradition of supporting Jewish causes and general charitable activities. They manage family businesses and investments, but they do not control the world economy. They do not manipulate governments from behind the scenes. They do not orchestrate wars or revolutions. They are simply one wealthy family among many, less wealthy and influential than numerous others, including the tech billionaires who have emerged in recent decades, operating in an economic system too complex and too large for any single family or institution to control. If we ask why the Rothschilds specifically became the focus of conspiracy theories rather than other wealthy families, part of the answer lies in their actual historical prominence during the 19th century, which gave them visibility and made them plausible candidates for theories about financial power. But much of the answer lies in anti-Semitism, in the long tradition of associating Jews with money and banking and blaming Jews for economic problems, and the Rothschilds, as the most famous Jewish banking family, became convenient symbols for these prejudices. their name weaponized by anti-Semites to advance political agendas that had nothing to do with the actual history or activities of the family itself. Understanding the real history of the Rothschild family, examining the evidence of what they actually did and how they actually operated and what influence they actually had, this understanding is important, not just for historical accuracy, but as antidote to conspiracy thinking and anti-Semitism, demonstrating that complex historical events have complex causes that cannot be reduced to the schemes of secret elites, that financial power is real but limited and operates through institutions and markets and regulations, not through shadowy control, and that wealthy families, including the Rothschilds, are human beings operating in historical contexts that constrain and enable them, not all-powerful puppet masters pulling strings from behind. Curtains. The story of the Rothschild family is remarkable, even when stripped of mythology, a story of extraordinary entrepreneurial success achieved from unpromising origins through intelligence and hard work and careful cultivation of relationships, of building an international business network that spanned Europe and operated effectively across cultural and linguistic barriers, of recognizing opportunities and seizing them, of providing financial services that governments and businesses needed, and doing so efficiently and reliably enough to build lasting relationships, of accumulating wealth and achieving social advancement while maintaining Jewish identity in societies that were often hostile to Jews, of weathering political upheavals and economic crises, of adapting to changing circumstances even when adaptation required abandoning strategies that had worked in the past, of surviving into the 21st century as a wealthy family and ongoing business when so many other aristocratic and business families have declined into obscurity. But it is also a story with limitations and failures, of opportunities missed, particularly in America, of wealth and influence declining in the 20th century as circumstances changed, and as the family failed to maintain the unity and coordinations that had distinguished earlier generations, of catastrophic losses in the Nazi period that destroyed branches of the family and demonstrated that wealth could not guarantee safety in the face of ideological hatred and state-organized persecution, of adaptation to diminished circumstances in the post-war period, operating as one financial services firm among many rather than as the dominant force in international finance. What lessons might we draw from the Rothschild story beyond the specific historical details? Perhaps the most obvious is that financial success, even on a spectacular scale, does not translate automatically into political power or control over historical events, that banks provide services to governments and businesses, but do not control them, that wealth creates influence, but not omnipotence, that markets and regulations and competition and historical forces constrain even the wealthiest and most sophisticated financial actors, and that conspiracy theories that attribute unlimited power to bankers or other elites mistake the reality of limited influence for fictional total control. Another lesson concerns the vulnerability of success, how position and wealth accumulated over generations can be lost through political upheaval or economic change or failure to adapt to new circumstances, how the Rothschilds' 19th century dominance did not protect them from 20th century catastrophes, how institutions that seem permanent can prove fragile when subjected to sufficient stress. And this is a reminder that no position is truly secure, that all human arrangements are contingent on circumstances that can change, that preservation of wealth and influence across generations requires constant adaptation, and that even successful adaptation may prove insufficient if historical changes are dramatic enough. A third lesson concerns anti-Semitism and conspiracy theories, how prejudice persists even when it contradicts evidence, how conspiracy thinking provides psychologically satisfying explanations that reality cannot match, how the Rothschilds continue to be blamed for events they had nothing to do with and attributed powers they do not possess, and this persistence of mythology, despite available facts, should concern us. For if conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds can survive despite lacking evidentiary support, then other conspiracy theories will similarly persist, and the work of establishing truth and combating falsehood is never finished. Each generation must undertake this work anew, and educators and journalists and historians have responsibilities to present accurate information and to challenge false narratives, however appealing those narratives may be to those who want simple explanations for complex realities. The relationship between the Rothschilds and various national governments evolved differently, depending on political systems and cultural contexts, and examining these relationships in detail reveals both the extent and the limits of financial power in political affairs. In Britain, where constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy created relatively stable political institutions, the Rothschilds developed long-term relationships with governments of different political orientations, providing financial services to both conservative and liberal administrations, maintaining access regardless of which party held power. And this continuity reflected their role as providers of technical expertise rather than as partisan political actors, though individual family members certainly held political views and sometimes expressed them through party affiliations and contributions. The British government's reliance on Rothschild financial services was greatest during periods of war or financial crisis, when normal sources of revenue proved insufficient and when quick access to large amounts of capital became essential for national survival or for pursuing strategic objectives. During the Napoleonic Wars, Nathan Rothschild's ability to transfer funds to Britain's continental allies provided crucial support for the coalition against France, and the British government paid substantial fees for these services, but considered them worth the cost given the strategic importance of maintaining the anti-French alliance. In later conflicts, including the Crimean War and various colonial campaigns, British governments again turned to the Rothschilds for financial support. And these transactions, while profitable for the family, served British strategic interests as defined by elected governments and their military advisors, not interests imposed by bankers against government wishes. The Rothschilds' involvement in British imperial expansion, particularly in Africa and the Middle East, illustrates the complex interplay between private financial interests and public policy. When Britain sought to expand influence in Egypt in the 1870s and 80s, the Rothschilds provided financing that supported this expansion, including the famous Suez Canal share purchase in 1875, and they profited from these transactions through fees and through subsequent business opportunities that British control of Egypt created. But British imperial policy in Egypt was driven by strategic calculations about protecting the route to India and about competing with France for influence in the Eastern Mediterranean. And while Rothschild financial support facilitated the execution of these policies, the fundamental strategic decisions were made by British political and military leaders for reasons that had little to do with Rothschild interests. though the two sets of interests often aligned because stable, British-controlled territories provided good environments for trade and investment. In France, the Rothschilds' relationship with governments was more turbulent, reflecting the political instability that characterized French history in the 19th and 20th centuries. The family had provided financial services to the Bourbon Restoration government after Napoleon's final defeat. But when revolution overthrew the Bourbons in 1830 and established the July monarchy under Louis-Philippe, the Rothschilds adapted quickly, developing relationships with the new regime and continuing their banking operations. When another revolution in 1848 overthrew Louis-Philippe and established the Second Republic, the Rothschilds again weathered the transition, though they faced temporary difficulties, including threats to their property from revolutionary crowds who associated them with the fallen monarchy and with financial exploitation of workers. Napoleon III's Second Empire, established after Louis Napoleon's coup in 1851, proved favorable for Rothschild business. The emperor pursued policies of economic development, including railway construction and urban renewal, that created opportunities for financial services and investments. And James de Rothschild became one of the wealthiest men in France during this period, building a magnificent palace and assembling an art collection that rivaled those of royalty. But when the Second Empire collapsed in 1870 after defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, the Rothschilds once again adapted, developing relationships with the new Third Republic and continuing their operations, demonstrating remarkable ability to survive political upheavals that destroyed other families and institutions. The Third Republic proved durable, lasting until France's defeat by Germany in 1940, and during this 70-year period, the Rothschilds maintained their position as major players in French finance, though they faced increasing competition from large joint stock banks and from government institutions, and they were periodic targets of anti-Semitic agitation, particularly during the Dreyfus Affair in the 1890s, when anti-Semitism became a major force in French politics, and when the Rothschilds, despite not being directly involved in the Dreyfus case, were attacked as symbols of supposed Jewish power and corruption. In Austria, the Rothschilds' relationship with the Habsburg government was particularly close during the reign of Prince Metternich from 1815 to 1848. When Salomon von Rothschild served as the primary banker to the Austrian Empire and developed personal relationships with Metternich and other senior officials. The Austrian government relied heavily on Rothschild loans to finance its military and to maintain its position as a major European power, and in return, the Rothschilds received noble titles and commercial privileges and access to investment. Opportunities and this symbiotic relationship, while mutually beneficial, also made the Rothschilds vulnerable to Austrian government policies and to political changes that could threaten their position. The Revolution of 1848, which forced Metternich to flee Vienna and threatened to break up the Habsburg Empire, posed serious dangers to the Rothschilds, who were identified with the old regime and who faced hostility from revolutionary movements that blamed them for economic problems. Salomon von Rothschild temporarily fled Vienna during the worst of the revolutionary violence, but the eventual restoration of conservative control allowed him to return and resume operations, though the Austrian branch never fully recovered the dominant position it had enjoyed before 1848, facing new competition and operating in a more complex political environment where multiple nationalities within the empire competed for influence and where traditional aristocratic authority was increasingly challenged by liberal and nationalist movements. The Rothschilds' operations in smaller European countries and in countries outside Europe reveal patterns similar to those in the major powers, providing financial services to governments that needed capital, earning fees, and building relationships, exercising influence but not control, adapting to political changes and managing risks as circumstances evolved. In Spain, the Rothschilds provided loans to various governments in the 19th century and acquired mining interests, including the Rio Tinto copper mines, that would prove highly profitable. In Brazil, they provided financing to the imperial government in the 1820s that helped consolidate Brazilian independence from Portugal, and they maintained business relationships with Brazil through the remainder of the imperial period, until the empire was overthrown and replaced by a republic in 1889. In the Ottoman Empire, the Rothschilds competed with other European banking houses for opportunities to provide loans to the perpetually cash-strapped government in Constantinople, and they invested in railways and other infrastructure projects. But the political instability and financial chaos that characterized the Ottoman Empire in its final decades made these operations risky, and the Rothschilds never established the dominant position there that they held in Western European countries, limiting their exposure to what they correctly recognized as a declining power with uncertain prospects. The question of Rothschild involvement in wars and whether they profited from conflict or actively promoted military action for financial gain has been central to conspiracy theories about the family, and examining the evidence requires careful attention to the actual mechanisms by which wars were financed and to the incentives that bankers faced. Governments at war needed enormous amounts of money quickly to pay soldiers and purchase supplies and weapons, and they raised this money through taxation and through borrowing, issuing bonds that investors would purchase in exchange for promises of future repayment with interest. Banks served as intermediaries in this process, helping governments design bond issues, marketing the bonds to investors, sometimes advancing money before bonds were sold, earning fees for these services. The Rothschilds, as major bankers, certainly profited from providing these services during various wars in the 19th century, and there is no doubt that war created opportunities for financial business that peacetime did not provide to the same degree. But this does not mean that the Rothschilds caused wars or desired them. The evidence suggests that they generally preferred peace, which was better for most forms of commerce and investment, and that they provided wartime financing because governments demanded it, and because refusing would have cost them relationships with important clients and would have ceded profitable business to competitors, not because they actively sought conflict. The myth that the Rothschilds financed both sides in wars, profiting regardless of outcome, contains elements of truth, but obscures important complexities. In some conflicts, different branches of the family did provide services to governments on opposite sides, most notably during the American Civil War, when the London Rothschilds maintained relationships with the Union government, while the Paris and Frankfurt branches had some dealings with Confederate agents. But this reflected the international structure of the family business and the autonomy of different branches, not a coordinated strategy of playing both sides. And in practice, the family's support for the Confederacy was minimal because they recognized that the Union was likely to win and that supporting the losing side would damage their position with the American government. The more significant point is that in most major wars of the 19th century, the Rothschilds' interests aligned clearly with particular sides based on their existing relationships and their assessment of likely outcomes, and they used their financial resources to support those sides, exercising choice rather than simply selling to all comers. During the Napoleonic Wars, they supported Britain and its allies against France because Nathan had established himself in London and because British victory seemed probable and would create a European order favorable to international commerce. During the German Wars of Unification in the 1860s, they generally supported Prussia because Prussian victory seemed likely and because a unified Germany under Prussian leadership promised political stability and economic development that would benefit their business interests. The claim that bankers promoted wars to create opportunities for profit assumes that bankers had sufficient political influence to push governments into conflicts they would not otherwise have pursued. But the historical evidence suggests that wars occurred for reasons that had little to do with banker preferences driven by nationalist passions, territorial ambitions, dynastic rivalries, strategic calculations, and ideological conflicts that bankers could not control and often could not even influence significantly. The Rothschilds might profit from providing wartime financing once conflicts began, but they were not in positions to start wars or to prevent them, and their influence over government policy, while real, was limited to offering advice that governments were free to ignore and to providing or withholding financial services, which gave them leverage in negotiations but not veto power over fundamental policy decisions. The family's cultural influence, exercised through art collecting and philanthropy, and through their participation in elite social circles, extended beyond finance and created a legacy that persists in ways that banking operations do not. The great Rothschild collections of paintings, sculptures, decorative arts, manuscripts, and rare books, assembled primarily in the 19th and early 20th centuries, represented not just accumulation of valuable objects, but engagement with cultural traditions and with questions of beauty and meaning that transcended commercial considerations. Family members who devoted time and resources to building these collections were motivated by genuine appreciation for art and by desire to be remembered as patrons rather than merely as wealthy bankers, and the eventual donation of much of these collections to museums ensured that this legacy would survive in public institutions accessible to future generations. The Rothschild collections that entered major museums included works by Leonardo da Vinci and Rembrandt, Vermeer and Gainsborough, medieval manuscripts and Renaissance bronzes, furniture by the finest French craftsmen, porcelains from China and Europe, an extraordinary variety of objects representing human artistic achievement across cultures and centuries. And these works, now displayed in the British Museum and the Louvre and numerous other institutions, bear the Rothschild name in their provenance, preserving the family's association with cultural patronage long after their financial dominance has faded. This cultural legacy, while less dramatic than the financial operations that made the family famous, perhaps represents a more lasting contribution to human welfare, making beautiful and significant objects available for study and appreciation rather than locked away in private collections accessible only to a privileged few. The architectural legacy is similarly significant. The great houses and palaces built by various Rothschilds in the 19th century represented extraordinary investments in architecture and landscape design, creating buildings that combined residential functions with spaces for entertaining and displaying art, set in carefully designed gardens and parks that reflected contemporary taste and horticultural knowledge. Some of these properties remain in family ownership and continue to be maintained and occasionally open to the public, while others have been donated to governments or institutions and serve as museums or educational centers. And these buildings, Like the art collections, preserve the Rothschild name and testify to the family's cultural ambitions beyond mere wealth accumulation. Waddesdon Manor in Buckinghamshire, built by Baron Ferdinand de Rothschild in the 1880s and designed in the style of a French chateau, houses an important collection of art and decorative arts and is now owned by the National Trust and open to visitors, providing not just a glimpse of how the wealthy lived in the Victorian era, but access to cultural treasures that might otherwise have been dispersed or lost. The Rothschild Palace in Vienna, confiscated by the Nazis and never fully recovered by the family after World War II, represented what was lost when the family's position in Austria was destroyed. A magnificent building and its contents scattered or destroyed, a reminder that cultural achievements, like financial fortunes, can be vulnerable to political catastrophe. The family's involvement in scientific research and education through funding of universities and research institutions represents another dimension of their legacy beyond finance. Various Rothschilds endowed professorships and laboratories, supported expeditions and archaeological excavations, funded medical research and public health initiatives, contributing to human knowledge and welfare in ways that had nothing to do with earning profits and everything to do with using wealth to support activities they considered valuable. This pattern of using private wealth for public benefit, while not unique to the Rothschilds, was pursued by them on a scale that few other families matched, and it created institutional legacies that continue to function long after the donors' deaths. The contemporary Rothschild family, dispersed across multiple countries and pursuing various careers and interests, maintains some coherence through family gatherings and through shared management of remaining family businesses and foundations. But the unity of earlier generations, when the five brothers operated as a coordinated team pursuing common strategies, cannot be recreated across hundreds of descendants with different interests and varying degrees of identification with family traditions. Some family members remain active in finance, running Rothschild & Co. or managing family investments, while others pursue careers in arts or academia or public service, and some choose to live privately without public association with the famous name. And this diversity reflects the normal evolution of wealthy families over generations, from focused entrepreneurial drive in the founding generation to dispersed interests and declining cohesion in later generations. The family businesses that continue to operate under the Rothschild name face competitive environments very different from those that their ancestors navigated, competing with giant multinational banks and with specialized financial firms operating in heavily regulated markets where the discretion and flexibility that characterized 19th century banking are no longer possible. Serving clients who have many alternative sources for financial services and who choose Rothschild firms based on demonstrated expertise rather than on historical reputation alone. The survival of these firms for more than 200 years is itself remarkable. Very few financial institutions last even a century, and the Rothschild name continues to carry weight in European finance, associated with quality and professionalism, even if no longer associated with dominance or with mysterious power. The question of what lessons the Rothschild story offers for understanding wealth and power in contemporary societies requires careful consideration of both historical specificity and broader patterns. The Rothschilds operated in particular historical circumstances that no longer exist. The 19th century world of royal governments and limited democracy, of relatively unregulated finance and limited transparency, of restricted franchise and aristocratic dominance, this world has been replaced by democratic systems and regulated markets and institutional investors in technologies that have fundamentally changed how wealth is created and deployed and how power is exercised. The specific strategies that worked for the Rothschilds, the international family network, and the privileged information and the close relationships with aristocratic elites, these cannot be replicated in contemporary circumstances, and families that achieve great wealth today do so through different mechanisms, typically through creating new technologies or businesses rather than through providing financial services to governments. Yet broader patterns remain relevant. The importance of networks and relationships, the value of information and its rapid dissemination, the advantages that accrue to those who can operate across national boundaries and who can see opportunities that others miss, the need to manage risks and to adapt to changing circumstances, the vulnerability of even great fortunes to political upheaval and economic change. These patterns recur across different historical periods and different industries, and studying the Rothschild experience can illuminate how wealth is built and maintained, and sometimes lost, how financial power operates and what its limits are, how families negotiate between commercial success and broader social responsibilities, how historical reputation is constructed and sometimes distorted through mythology and conspiracy theory. The anti-Semitism that has consistently attached to the Rothschild name from the 19th century through the Nazi period to contemporary conspiracy theories deserves particular attention as phenomenon distinct from legitimate criticism of wealth, concentration, or financial practices. Anti-Semitic representations of the Rothschilds have used the family as symbols of supposed Jewish characteristics, portraying them as greedy and manipulative, as disloyal to the nations where they lived, as part of a coordinated Jewish conspiracy to control Christian societies, and these representations have been used to justify persecution of Jews generally, from discriminatory laws and social exclusion in the 19th century, to genocide in the 20th century, to contemporary violence and harassment targeting Jewish communities. Understanding this anti-Semitic tradition is important for recognizing it when it appears in contemporary forms, conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds controlling central banks or manipulating currencies or orchestrating political events. These theories often contain coded or explicit anti-Semitic content, recycling old prejudices in modern language, and they should be recognized as such and challenged, not because the Rothschilds deserve special protection from criticism. Any powerful family or institution can and should be subject to legitimate scrutiny. But because false theories that attribute to them powers they do not possess and blame them for problems they did not cause serve to perpetuate dangerous prejudices that have caused immense human suffering. The decline of Rothschild financial power in the 20th century, dramatic and undeniable when comparing their 19th century dominance to their current position as significant but not dominant financial actors, offers lessons about the impermanence of even the most impressive achievements and about the forces that drive historical change beyond individual or family control. The shift of economic power from Europe to America, the rise of large institutional investors and multinational banks, the expansion of government regulation, the development of new financial technologies and instruments, the two world wars that destroyed the old European order, all of these changes created an environment in which the Rothschild business model became less effective and in which maintaining their position would have required transformations that the family proved unable or unwilling to make, particularly establishing a major presence in the United States when that was still possible in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This failure to adapt fully to changing circumstances, while understandable given the family's deep roots in Europe and their success there, proved costly in the long run, as American financial institutions grew to dwarf their European competitors, and as the dollar replaced sterling and gold as the primary international currency and reserve asset. The Rothschilds remained significant in European finance, but became peripheral to the new American-centered financial system that emerged after World War II, and no amount of historical reputation or accumulated wealth could compensate for this strategic error of geographic focus, demonstrating that in competitive markets, past success does not guarantee future success, and that failing to recognize and respond to fundamental shifts in economic geography and financial structure leads to relative decline regardless of family name or historical achievements. The family's future remains uncertain, as all human futures are uncertain. Current family members will make choices about whether to maintain family businesses and traditions or to pursue independent paths, whether to continue using accumulated wealth to support charitable and cultural causes, or to focus on commercial success and wealth preservation, whether to maintain public profiles or to retreat into privacy. And these choices, multiplied across hundreds of family members, will determine whether the Rothschild name continues to carry meaning in future generations or fades into purely historical significance. The family businesses may continue operating under professional management, even with declining family involvement. The name itself has commercial value independent of family participation, or they may be sold or merged into other institutions, ending the direct connection between family and financial operations that has existed for more than 2 centuries. What seems certain is that the Rothschilds will never again occupy the position they held in 19th century European finance. That era is gone, and the conditions that made it possible cannot return. The world has changed too fundamentally, become too complex and too large for any single family to dominate international finance the way the 5 brothers and their immediate descendants did in the century between Waterloo and World War I. This does not diminish the historical significance of what they achieved, building from modest origins in a Frankfurt ghetto to international financial prominence, creating an institution that shaped European economic development and that influenced political events, accumulating wealth on a scale that became legendary, maintaining Jewish identity while achieving social acceptance in Christian societies that were often hostile to Jews, surviving into the 21st century while so many other 19th century institutions disappeared. All of this represents remarkable achievement, worthy of study and understanding, even as we recognize the myths and separate them from reality, and acknowledge the mixed legacy of any institution that wielded significant power over extended time periods. As we approach the conclusion of this meditation on the Rothschild family, we might reflect on what their story tells us about the relationship between money and power, between private wealth and public policy, between individual agency and historical forces. The Rothschilds were neither all-powerful puppet masters, secretly controlling governments, nor passive victims of historical circumstances beyond their control. They were intelligent and ambitious people who recognized opportunities and built institutions to exploit those opportunities, who cultivated relationships and provided services that governments and businesses needed, who accumulated wealth through profitable transactions and generally legal, though sometimes ethically questionable, practices, who exercised influence within systems they did not create and could not fully control, who made choices that sometimes succeeded spectacularly and sometimes failed costly, who adapted to some historical changes and failed to adapt to others who built something remarkable that has partially survived into our time while also suffering catastrophic losses that demonstrate the vulnerability of all human achievements. Their story reminds us that financial power, while real and significant, is not unlimited and cannot override political and social forces. When these forces reach sufficient intensity, the Nazis destroyed the Austrian Rothschilds despite their wealth. Because anti-Semitic ideology and state power proved stronger than money, and this tragic fact should temper any tendency to attribute omnipotence to wealthy individuals or families. They operate within political and social contexts that constrain and enable them, and when those contexts change dramatically, wealth alone cannot guarantee survival, much less dominance. The story also reminds us that conspiracy theories, while psychologically satisfying and often simple to understand, typically misrepresent complex historical realities, attributing to human agents powers and intentions that do not match the evidence, and the Rothschild conspiracy theories illustrate this pattern perfectly, taking a family that achieved remarkable but limited financial success and transforming them through mythology into omnipotent controllers of world events. And this transformation tells us more about human psychology and about the persistence of anti-Semitism than about actual Rothschild activities or influence. For those who study history seriously, the Rothschild story offers rich material for understanding how international finance developed in the 19th century, how private banking houses operated before the era of large joint stock banks and government central banks, how Jewish families navigated hostile social environments while building commercial success, how wealth and social position interacted in societies with hereditary aristocracies and emerging middle classes, how technological changes in communication and transportation affected business operations, how wars and political upheavals created both opportunities and dangers for financial institutions, and how families tried to maintain unity and purpose across generations as circumstances changed around them. The archival evidence about Rothschild operations, preserved in family papers and in government archives and in business records of institutions they dealt with, allows historians to reconstruct their activities in considerable detail. And what this evidence shows is not secret manipulation and puppet master control, but mundane business correspondence, negotiations over fees and terms, assessments of risks and opportunities, coordination among family members operating in different cities, management of relationships with clients and competitors, all the ordinary business of banking conducted by intelligent and ambitious people who understood their trade and pursued it successfully for many decades, but who faced the same kinds of challenges and limitations that all businesses face, and who made both shrewd decisions and costly errors as circumstances evolved. The family's adaptation to the 20th century, partial and incomplete as it proved, demonstrates both resilience and vulnerability. After the catastrophic losses in Austria during the Nazi period and the disruptions in France during the war, the surviving family members rebuilt what they could, reopening banking operations in London and Paris, recovering some confiscated property, resuming investment activities, but they never recovered the dominant position they had enjoyed before the World Wars destroyed the European order that had sustained their operations. The post-war world of American financial dominance, of large institutional investors, of regulated markets and increased transparency, of new technologies and new financial instruments. This world required adaptations that proved difficult for a family business operating with traditional methods and with capital that, while still substantial, was no longer sufficient for the largest international transactions. The decision to maintain the businesses as family operations rather than converting them to public corporations with outside shareholders was both a strength and a limitation. It preserved family control and allowed for long-term thinking, unconstrained by quarterly earnings pressures, but it also limited access to capital and made it harder to attract the best professional talent, who might prefer to work for larger institutions with more resources and clearer career paths. The Rothschilds chose to remain a family business, and this choice shaped their trajectory in the 20th century, allowing them to survive as independent institutions, but accepting that they would no longer dominate finance the way their 19th century ancestors had. The cultural and philanthropic legacy, often overlooked in discussions focused on financial operations and conspiracy theories, represents perhaps the most lasting contribution the family has made to human welfare. The art collections that now reside in major museums, the buildings that serve as cultural centers, the research institutions and educational programs that family wealth has supported, the charitable activities that have helped countless individuals and communities, these contributions transcend the accumulation and investment of capital and represent engagement with questions of beauty and knowledge and human flourishing that go beyond commerce. When we visit a museum and view a Rembrandt or a Vermeer that once belonged to the Rothschilds, when we study medieval manuscripts or Renaissance sculptures that the family collected and eventually donated, when we benefit from research conducted at institutions they funded, we participate in a legacy that extends beyond the family itself, that enriches human culture generally, and that demonstrates what can be achieved when private wealth is deployed for public benefit. This legacy will outlast the banking operations and will be remembered when the specific financial transactions that created the wealth are forgotten by all but specialist historians. The question of whether the Rothschilds represent a model to be emulated or a warning to be heeded invites different answers depending on one's values and priorities. For those who admire entrepreneurial success and financial acumen, the Rothschilds' rise from the Frankfurt ghetto to international prominence represents an inspiring story of what can be achieved through intelligence and hard work and strategic thinking. For those concerned about wealth concentration and financial power, the Rothschilds exemplify the dangers of allowing private fortunes to grow without adequate democratic oversight and regulation. For those interested in Jewish history and identity, the Rothschilds' navigation of anti-Semitism, while maintaining Jewish identity and supporting Jewish causes, provides a complex case study of assimilation and resistance. For those who study conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism, the Rothschild mythology illustrates how prejudice distorts understanding and how dangerous false narratives can become. The family itself, in its current dispersed form, continues to grapple with questions of identity and purpose that all wealthy families eventually face. How to maintain family cohesion across generations and geographic distance. How to preserve and transmit values and traditions when members pursue different careers and hold different beliefs. How to use wealth responsibly in ways that benefit society while also maintaining the family's interests. How to respond to conspiracy theories and anti-Semitic attacks that continue to target the family name. How to balance privacy with the public interest in understanding the activities of wealthy and influential families. These questions have no simple answers, and different family members make different choices. But the questions themselves remain relevant, not just for the Rothschilds, but for all families and institutions that wield significant economic or social power. As we move toward the conclusion of this extended meditation on the Rothschild family, we must return to the original questions that motivated this inquiry. Who were the Rothschilds really, beyond the myths and legends? What power did they actually wield, and how did they exercise it? What happened to diminish their influence in the 20th century? And do they still matter today in our 21st century world, so different from the 19th century Europe where they flourished? The Rothschilds were fundamentally a banking family that achieved extraordinary success in the 19th century through a combination of factors, including the establishment of an international network spanning major European cities, the cultivation of relationships with governments and aristocratic elites who needed financial services, the development of superior information systems that gave them advantages over competitors, the maintenance of family unity and coordination across generations, and substantial luck in being positioned to benefit from the economic and political developments of their era, including the Napoleonic Wars and the subsequent period of European expansion and industrialization. The power they wielded was primarily economic, the ability to provide or withhold capital for government loans and business ventures, and this economic power translated into influence over policy through conventional channels, including access to decision-makers, ability to offer advice, capacity to support or oppose particular measures through financial means. But it was not direct control over governments or historical events, and it was constrained by competition from other financial institutions, by government regulations and policies they could not dictate, by market forces and historical developments beyond their control, and by the autonomous interests of governments and businesses that made their own decisions based on their own priorities, even when those decisions conflicted with Rothschild preferences. What diminished their influence in the 20th century was a combination of factors, including the shift of economic power from Europe to America, where they never established major operations, the growth of large institutional investors with resources exceeding what private banking houses could command, the increased government regulation of financial markets that reduced the advantages of private banking, the catastrophic losses during the Nazi period that destroyed their Austrian operations and severely damaged their French position, and the failure to maintain the family unity and coordination that had distinguished earlier generations. And these factors, operating together over decades, transformed the Rothschilds from dominant players in international finance to significant but not dominant participants in European financial markets. Do they still matter today? In absolute terms, yes, the Rothschild businesses continue to operate and provide financial services. Family members continue to be wealthy and to support charitable and cultural causes. The family name continues to carry historical weight. In relative terms, no. They are not among the most important financial institutions or the wealthiest families in the world. They do not wield the kind of influence their 19th century ancestors possessed. They operate in competitive markets, where they must prove their value through performance rather than relying on historical reputation. And the mythology that surrounds them has become detached from contemporary reality, reflecting past prominence rather than present power. Yet the mythology persists. Conspiracy theories continue to attribute to the Rothschilds influence they do not possess, and this persistence is itself significant, not as evidence of actual Rothschild power, but as evidence of anti-Semitism's durability and of the human need for simple explanations of complex phenomena and for identifiable villains who can be blamed for problems that actually have multiple causes and no single responsible party. Combating these false theories requires education and evidence, and sustained effort to present accurate historical information, and this work remains important because conspiracy theories that target the Rothschilds ultimately target all Jews and contribute to the anti-Semitism that continues to cause harm in contemporary societies. The lessons we might extract from the Rothschild story extend beyond the specific historical details to broader questions about wealth and power, about how families navigate success across generations, about the relationship between private capital and public policy, about how mythology develops and why it persists despite contradicting evidence, about anti-Semitism and how it manifests in different historical periods, about the impermanence of even the most impressive achievements and the vulnerability of all human institutions to historical change. If we were to distill the Rothschild story to its essence, stripping away the mythology and focusing on documented facts, what would we find? We would find a family that started with modest means in an unpromising environment, and through intelligence and hard work and strategic thinking, built one of the great financial institutions of the 19th century, accumulating enormous wealth and wielding significant influence over European economic development for several generations, contributing to infrastructure development and government finance and industrial expansion, while also accumulating great art collections and supporting cultural and charitable causes, maintaining Jewish identity, while achieving social acceptance in Christian societies, surviving political upheavals and economic crises through adaptation and diversification, suffering catastrophic losses during the Nazi period that demonstrated wealth's inability to guarantee security in face of ideological hatred backed by state power, rebuilding in the post-war period, but never recovering their former dominance as circumstances changed and new institutions rose to prominence, continuing into the 21st century as significant but not dominant financial actors and as wealthy individuals pursuing various interests while maintaining some connection to family traditions and businesses. This story, accurately told, is remarkable enough without need for embellishment or conspiracy theories. It demonstrates what can be achieved through entrepreneurial effort and what can be lost through historical change and external forces beyond individual or family control. It shows both the possibilities and the limits of financial power, the ways that wealth creates influence but not omnipotence, the importance of adaptation to changing circumstances, and the difficulties of maintaining success across generations. The hard persistence of anti-Semitism and the vulnerability of minorities regardless of wealth or social position, the value of cultural patronage and charitable giving as legacies that outlast commercial success. Epilogue: the question of invisible power. And so we return to the question posed at the beginning of this long meditation. If true power is invisible, if it operates in silence and shadow, if those who truly control events leave no fingerprints and generate no headlines, then perhaps we have been looking in the wrong places, examining the wrong evidence, asking the wrong questions. Perhaps the Rothschilds were never the invisible hand controlling history. Perhaps they were always too visible, too obviously wealthy, too clearly identifiable, leaving too many records and generating too much mythology to be the secret masters that conspiracy theorists imagine. Or perhaps the entire framework is mistaken. Perhaps there are no secret masters, no invisible hands, no puppet masters pulling strings from behind curtains. Perhaps history is the product of countless actors making countless decisions in response to countless circumstances, a process too complex and too chaotic for any single family or group to control. And the appeal of conspiracy theories lies not in their truth, but in their simplicity, their provision of clear villains and simple causation in a world that is neither clear nor simple. The Rothschild family name has indeed largely disappeared from public view in recent decades. Family members generally avoid publicity, the businesses operate with professional discretion, there are no Rothschilds regularly appearing in media or holding high political office, and this retreat from visibility, this calculated obscurity, feeds speculation about what they might be hiding, what power they might be exercising in secret. But the more mundane explanation is that they learned through painful experience that visibility brings danger, that being obvious targets during the Nazi period cost them dearly, and that operating quietly and maintaining low profiles serves both business interests and personal security better than the high-profile approach of earlier generations. But obscurity is not the same as power. Invisibility is not evidence of control, and the absence of headlines does not prove the presence of hidden influence. The Rothschilds today, like other wealthy families with long histories, undoubtedly maintain networks of relationships and business interests that give them some influence in certain spheres, but this is very different from the kind of comprehensive control that conspiracy theories attribute to them, and conflating the two, treating ordinary business influence as if it were secret domination, obscures rather than illuminates how power actually operates in contemporary societies. If we seek to understand where true power resides in the 21st century, we might look not to old banking families, however wealthy they remain, but to the technology companies that control information flows and shape how billions of people communicate and access knowledge, to the governments of major powers that command military forces and regulate economic activity, to the large institutional investors that manage trillions in assets and vote shares in most major corporations, to the international organizations and regulatory bodies that set standards and enforce rules across borders, to the social movements and ideological currents that shape public opinion and electoral outcomes, and to the complex interactions among all these actors and institutions that produce outcomes no single entity controls or even fully understands. Power in modern societies is diffused and contested, exercised through multiple channels simultaneously, subject to checks and balances and competitive pressures, visible in some manifestations and hidden in others, always limited by circumstances and by the autonomous choices of other actors, never total and never permanent, and seeking to locate it in a single family or group, however wealthy or influential, represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how complex systems actually function. The Rothschilds, then, are neither the invisible rulers of the world nor irrelevant historical curiosities. They are wealthy individuals and institutions that operate in the same world we all inhabit, subject to the same laws and market forces and historical contingencies, exercising influence proportional to their resources and relationships, but not control over events, preserving a legacy built by earlier generations while adapting to circumstances very different from those their ancestors navigated, maintaining a famous name that carries both historical weight and contemporary burden, aware that mythology has created expectations and attributions they cannot fulfill, and accusations they cannot refute, and choosing, for the most part, to operate quietly and avoid attention that brings more problems than benefits. And perhaps this is the final truth about power, that those who possess it in limited and legitimate forms typically prefer to exercise it quietly and effectively, rather than dramatically and visibly, while those who are imagined to possess it in unlimited and illegitimate forms become targets of speculation and blame for problems they did not cause and cannot solve. And distinguishing between these two very different situations requires evidence and analysis and willingness to accept complexity rather than embracing simple stories that satisfy psychological needs but misrepresent reality. If the Rothschild name continues to appear in conspiracy theories decades hence, when everyone alive today is gone and the world has changed in ways we cannot predict, it will be because the psychological and social needs that such theories serve continue to exist, because anti-Semitism continues to find new expressions and new targets, because humans continue to seek simple explanations for complex problems, not because the Rothschild family continues to secretly control events from behind. The scenes and recognizing this distinction, maintaining it through education and evidence, and sustained commitment to truth, represents important work that each generation must undertake anew. The story of the Rothschilds, properly understood, is a human story, neither the heroic tale of entrepreneurial triumph that some versions present, nor the sinister narrative of evil manipulation that conspiracy theories promote, but something more complex and more interesting, a story of people who seized opportunities and built institutions, who accumulated wealth and exercised influence, who adapted to some changes and failed to adapt to others, who contributed to human culture and also participated in economic systems that exploited workers, who maintained Jewish identity in hostile environments and also sought acceptance in Christian societies, who achieved remarkable things and also suffered devastating losses, who remain wealthy but no longer dominant, visible in history, but largely invisible today, remembered in mythology more than in accurate understanding. And this complex reality, messy and contradictory and incomplete as all human stories are, deserves to be known and understood on its own terms, rather than being distorted to serve ideological agendas or to satisfy psychological needs for simple villains and secret masters. As evening falls across the financial centers of the world, as traders close their positions and bankers review their daily operations, and investors assess their portfolios, somewhere in London or Paris or New York, there are people named Rothschild, going about their business, managing family investments or providing financial advice, or pursuing entirely different careers, living lives that are extraordinary in their wealth, but ordinary in their daily concerns, facing the same human challenges of finding meaning and maintaining relationships and passing values to the next generation that all people face, aware of their family's history, but not defined by it, benefiting from inherited wealth but also creating their own achievements, carrying a famous name that opens some doors and closes others, and these actual human beings, with their particular strengths and weaknesses and choices and circumstances, bear little resemblance to the mythological Rothschilds of conspiracy theories. And if we seek to understand power and wealth in the modern world, we must begin by seeing these real people rather than the imaginary puppet masters, by examining evidence rather than accepting mythology, by embracing complexity rather than settling for simplicity, and by recognizing that the most important truths about how the world works are usually not hidden in shadows, but visible to those who look carefully and think critically and refuse to let fear or prejudice distort their understanding. The question remains unanswered because perhaps unanswerable with certainty. Does one family, this family or any family, still hold its hand on the pulse of the world. The evidence suggests that power in modern societies is too dispersed and too contested for any single actor to dominate. But the question itself will persist because it speaks to deep human concerns about control and agency, and whether the course of history can be influenced by human will, or whether larger forces beyond individual control determine outcomes. And different people will answer this question differently based on their experiences and beliefs and hopes and fears. And perhaps the continuing debate about the Rothschilds, long after their actual dominance of international finance has ended, serves purposes that have nothing to do with the family itself, allowing us to explore questions about power and wealth and influence and identity and belonging that matter to all of us as we try to make sense of the world we inhabit and our place within it. Thank you for spending this night with History Before Sleep Stories. May your dreams be calm, your sleep be deep, and your mind return to history whenever you wish to wander again. Good night.